Welcome to the Daily Dawg podcast. This is Game Week 3. This is our Tuesday podcast, and today is the day that we profile and take a deep look at Tennessee, our opponent for this week's game, Game Week 3, Saturday, September 13th. The game will be in Knoxville, Tennessee at 3:30 p.m. on ABC, ESPN, I guess, also. But you can probably find it on the ESPN app. I haven't looked at all the details, but it is the ABC 3:30 game, sort of taking the old SEC on CBS 3:30 slot that used to be there. Let's jump in and talk about Tennessee. I think most of you are aware that Tennessee is coached by Josh Heupel. Josh Heupel was at UCF before he came to Tennessee, and since he has come to Tennessee, he is. I'm not going to look at his overall record. I'm just going to look at his record at Tennessee for the time being. So we're going to focus on what he's done since he's come to Tennessee. At Tennessee, he's 37-15. He's been there for 4 years. This is his fifth season. So he's, I guess, actually now 39-15 because he's won his first two games. He was 37-15 coming into the season. He has a 25-4 record in home games. One thing that they have done is they have been considered a potent offensive team. Heupel has brought he was a quarterback, as you might remember. He was a quarterback for Bob Stoops' championship Oklahoma team. And he, certainly comes from an offensive background. He's thought of as being something of an offensive guru. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But they have a tendency to put up a lot of points and a lot of yards, get people excited about that. Taking a look at what kind of where they are right now. Last year's team went 10-3, as you might remember, made the playoff, had a lot of enthusiasm. There was a lot of excitement around the Tennessee program. When playoff time came, Tennessee fans put on their road crew orange and headed to Ohio to do their best to embarrass the SEC, singing Rocky Top and wearing road crew gear. And but they did do an impressive job of invading Ohio State and buying up a lot of tickets. The enthusiasm for Ohio State was low, having just lost to Michigan in their last game of the year for the fourth time in a row, missing out on the Big Ten championship and generally causing people to have an apoplectic heart attack about the state of Ohio State football. And that would all turn around when Tennessee showed up, because Tennessee came to town thinking, we've got them. We're going to go in here and kick Big Ten butt right in their own backyard. And this is going to be fun. And all the fans streamed up there to Ohio, and it went the exact opposite. Ohio State kicked Tennessee butt and sent them back home packing. So they had a nice season. Other than getting spanked by us and losing earlier in the season to Arkansas, they came into the playoffs with a 10-2 record and thought that they would advance and make some noise. They thought they had Ohio State right where they want them, and it didn't work out that way. Excuse me. Since the Ohio State game, Tennessee lost a lot of what was the identity of that team. A little contrary to Heupel's record as an offensive guru, last year's team was really built on a great defense. And when he first got there, the Tennessee defense was horrid, but they have gotten better every year of each of the 4 seasons. We're not so sure where they are so far this year, but last year they were a legitimate high-level defense. They held teams to 16 points a game and under 300 yards a game, and they were a real threat. They had a strong front seven. They had some strong pass rush and front defensive line play. And overall, they were just a really solid unit. And it was thought that that defense, along with at least a good offense, would make them very potent and scary. But they were not able to slow us down very much. They were not able to slow Ohio State down very much. And they were not able to do much putting points up themselves. Since then, they've lost a few pieces. They're a couple of their top guys from that defense, but they do have some talented guys back behind there who people think might step up. They also really built that team on a powerful running game. Sampson was running back last year, and he was a tough cookie. And he is gone. He has moved on, and so have some of those defensive players. And they also lost their top 3 wide receivers, and they also lost 4 of their offensive linemen. So Tennessee, like us, like Ohio State, like Texas, like all the teams we've been talking about, A lot of pieces to rebuild. Of course, that's the nature of college football. Every year is a different team in college football, but it's probably a little worse than it's ever been because of the way folks can jump around. But in this case, these were just Heupel had built kind of the old-fashioned way. He had some veteran guys across those positions. They made a name for themselves, ran out of eligibility, and now they moved on. And so they're doing some rebuilding. They're replacing those wide receivers. They're replacing those offensive linemen. They have been recruiting fairly well, and they have some high-profile people, even though they lost their top three wide receivers. Mike Matthews was a five-star receiver who was recruited out of the metro Atlanta area. And he went to Tennessee, was used very sparingly last year, but is expected to be a bigger deal this year. They have a good tight end named Ethan Davis and a senior tight end, Kitzelman, who's made some plays. They also made some noise by getting the number one offensive line recruit in the nation and one of the top overall recruits because of how important offensive linemen are in this game and the pro game. And David Sanders was his name. And so these are some players we'd have been happy to have, but these are folks that chose Tennessee and they've really upped the level of play. Or, well, not the level of play yet. We're still waiting to see as these guys develop, but they've upped the level of recruiting. They also had a transfer from Notre Dame on offensive line. Sam Pendleton came over from Notre Dame. But it's going to be something to see as they step up in competition playing us and get into their SEC schedule, how their line holds up when anytime you lose four linemen. And look, we're in the same boat. We lost 3-4 linemen to the NFL. And so we're exactly in the same boat. But so are they. A lot of people, a lot of college football experts will tell you that experience across the offensive line may be one of the biggest indicators, especially in a line dominating league like the SEC. So last year they had 112 career starts across their offensive line. This year they just have 46. So that's a pretty low number. A couple of things you can look at since Heupel got there over the last 4 years. They have averaged over these last couple of years. His first year there on offense, they averaged 39.3 points a game and 475 yards of offense. His second year, which was his best year so far. I mean, I guess that's arguable since they went 10-2 last year and made the playoff, although they were bounced in the first game and looked a little ugly doing it, finished with a 10-3 record. They had finished number 9 in the country, whereas in the 2022 season, Heupel's second year, they went 11-2 and finished number 6 in the country. They averaged 46 points a game and 526 yards of offense. The next year, they slipped down to 31.8 or about 32 points a game and 448 yards of offense. And last year, they were averaging 447 yards of offense and close to 36 points a game, 35.7 points a game. On defense, as I mentioned, they were not a good team. The Heupel's first couple years defensively, they averaged giving up over 400 yards, about 422 yards of offense to the opposing teams, and 29.1 points a game that first year that Heupel took over. The next year they improved. They were still giving up over 400 yards a game and close to 23 points a game. Then they steadily improved a little bit more. They cut that down to about 335 yards of offense allowed to the opponents in 2023 and down to 20.3 or just about 20 points a game. And then, as I already mentioned last year, they were able to hold opponents to 16 points a game, about 295 yards, which is, those are numbers that are good by any metric. So Heupel definitely came in, and the initial profile or thinking was that he was an offensive focused coach, and it was not clear. Obviously, Tennessee's had a history of being a good defensive team, like some of the upper echelon teams in the SEC, but it wasn't clear that he was going to bring the energy and the focus to making a high level defense, but he has. And I think one thing that's fair to say, too, is he has brought a certain level of talent, and he's been increasing the talent. I mean, that was one thing Tennessee was missing for a long time. They just weren't able to consistently bring in talent. They weren't bereft of talent. They hadn't fallen all the way down, like completely off the radar. But Heupel has been able to bring a solid effort to their recruiting efforts, and they seem to be doing better actually as they go. Just taking a look They've been, well, it's been a little up and down, but I would say they're on the upswing. So in 2022, his first full season, they were 17th in the nation recruiting. In 2023, they jumped up to 10th. And then for 2024, they were 14th. And then last year, they had the 11th best class. And so far this year, they're holding on to the 8th best class. So initially, they were pretty far down. And when he took over, kind of bottom of the rankings or just out of them. And he was able to sign a top 25 class, but a lower top 25 class initially. And now they're consistently hovering 10, 14, 11, 8. So they're close to averaging about the 10th best class in the country. Um, that has been an improvement in their talent base, and it showed up on their defense especially. They were able to put together a strong offensive team using Heupel's scheme almost right away, and they've been able to sort of plug and play people into their system. But the level of improvement on that defense, as we talked about, just steadily improving both yardage and points, really makes them more of a legitimate long-term contender, I think, in the SEC. You have to do both, as any good SEC fan knows. And one of the things that probably year in and year out most consistently separates SEC teams from other conferences is just the level of defensive play, especially across the defensive line. The front seven of a lot of the elite SEC teams is just on a different level. And Tennessee's ability to compete in that regard is much better. So we mentioned a couple of the recent recruits they had, how those people are going to step up and help them. We've talked about a little bit about uh, what kind of what kind of offense and defense we've seen from them, and they've been pretty steadily an offensive force, but getting better and better on defense as they've gone. Taking a look at these last 4 years and the matchups between Heupel at Tennessee and Kirby Smart, and we could go back and look at the run against Tennessee, and we will on a bigger level. But right now, we're just focused on Heupel because he's been there long enough. He has a profile. Kirby has a profile, and so we're probably going to get the most information that we're going to get kind of looking at that matchup and trying to get the expectations. This is a really early matchup. Last year, obviously, we played them very late in the season, near the end of the season, and we have often played them in October, sometimes into November. So playing here in the third week of the year kind of goes back to the early days. My freshman year in college, we played Tennessee somewhere in the first, second, third game of the year, and you might famously remember from all the times you've seen the highlights and the Larry Munson clips of Herschel running over Bill Bates, and my God, a freshman as Herschel just wowed Larry, and everybody was in awe. And he led Georgia to the comeback against Tennessee, having been down 15-0 on the road in Knoxville. Those famous those were the first that was first game of the year, I think, or it was definitely the first SEC game then. So it was often true. We did not play Tennessee a lot before the conference expanded and split into two divisions. There was very sparingly, but once that happened, Tennessee became an every year rival, which really changed the nature of the Georgia Tennessee series, which had been sporadic. Um, but when we played them, we often used to play them in September early in the year. And then over the last 10 more plus more years. I haven't really studied the schedule to see, but that game has moved back later and later in years. So a lot of fans now are used to seeing that game be later in the year, and this year it's been pushed back up into the beginning of the year. Part of what that means is we don't really know what we're looking at. Just like we've been talking all this first week or two about Georgia and what we've seen on the field, and we don't know exactly what it means because we it's hard to judge against the level of competition we've been playing, and it's hard to manage our expectations because that's not the type of teams we're going to be seeing. Same thing a little bit with Tennessee. Tennessee's impressed people a little bit more than Georgia because Tennessee played Syracuse, who had a nice season, won 10 games last year with Fran Brown as the head coach, who had been coach at Georgia and moved on to Syracuse. And it looks like a smart hire on their part. He's an energetic guy who's done a great job for them, and he's making good headlines and doing good recruiting and building that program. So congrats to Fran Brown. Some of you may have heard about his unorthodox approach to winning and losing last year. He famously was uh, quoted as saying that soap showering is for winners. Soap and showering is for winners. And he doesn't even feel like taking a shower when his team loses. He just wants to soak in his nastiness and sweat, which must be terrible for his family and everybody around him. And there's been a lot of jokes and discussion about that in the media. This last week, he made news again. The team, after getting waxed by Tennessee in the opening game, turned around and played an opponent that they should have beaten, even though they're in a rebuilding mode this year in UConn. And they did pull out an overtime win against UConn, and Fran Brown was not happy with that either. So I don't know if they got to shower after they did this, but he had the team run sprints after the game because he felt like they needed to put in a little more effort based on what he saw on the field against UConn. So since Heupel took over, we have continued what has been a long winning streak against Tennessee, but the 4 games since Heupel took over have gone like this. In 2021, Tennessee was a 7-6 team that was neither ranked at the beginning of the year or the end of the year, and we beat them 41-17. In that game, we outgained them 487 yards to 387 yards, and they've had 2 turnovers that we forced. In 2022, again, I mentioned that was maybe their best year so far. Depends on how you view last year. They were 11-2. They finished number 6 in the nation. When they played us, they were either number 1 or number 2, depending on how you look at it. They were number 2 in the. You might remember this sort of ugly controversy. A lot of Bulldog fans were taken aback by this. We had been the number 1 team in the country, but when the playoff rankings were announced, because this game was played later and the playoff rankings were announced, Tennessee had impressed some people and jumped up to number 1 in the playoff rankings. And in the current way everybody handles things in the media, they typically will use the AP rankings to set the matchup. This week's matchup is number 6 versus number 15, according to the AP rankings. There are no playoff rankings yet. But as soon as the playoff rankings come out, ESPN and all the other big media companies have a tendency to just ditch the AP poll and start using the playoff ranking, which makes sense because that is what's going to determine the championship and who's in the playoffs. So I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. It's just it's kind of a funny system where for about 2/3 of the season we use the AP rankings and we all hover over the AP rankings, and then as soon as the playoff rankings come along, sort of like a new hot boyfriend or girlfriend, we just drop them like a hot potato and walk off to the new shiny toy. Um, but Tennessee earned that number 1 ranking with the playoff committee. They were number 2 in the AP poll, and we were number 1 in the AP poll. So depending on where you look for your rankings, you'll see different historical view of that game. But from the AP poll point of view, we were number 1 and they were number 2 when we played, and they lost 27-13. You might remember that as the Stetson Bennett call me game, where he kept giving the little hand sign like, hey, call me, because the Tennessee fans had gotten a hold of his cell phone number and apparently had been trying to razz him prior to the game calling him. He took it to them and said, hey, go ahead, call me. I'm all up. So that was sort of a fun game. They started as 8-point underdogs and again lost the game 27-13. In that game, we outgained them. Neither team put up a ton of offense, but we outgained them 387-289. In the 2023 game, they were a 9-4 team to finish the season, and they finished the year ranked number 17. When they played us, they were ranked number 21, and they were at home. They were a 9-point underdog at home, and we waxed them 38-10. The yardage totals were pretty ugly in that game, and it was just generally probably the ugliest game in the series with since Heupel took over. We ran up 472 yards of offense to 277 for them. We waxed them with nearly 200 yards of offense. They were only 2 of 11 on third downs, and they only possessed the ball for 19 minutes in the game. So they got kind of thoroughly beat and embarrassed at home. So that didn't go so well. They did, however, again manage to finish as the number 17 team in the country at 9-4. Last year, as we've already discussed, they finished the season 10-3. They made the playoff. They were in the final poll at number 9, and they lost 31-17. They came in as an 8-point underdog, ranked 6th, or yeah, I think they were ranked 6th, and we were ranked 11th because we had fallen down due to the loss to Ole Miss. But we were able to use the Tennessee game to remind people who the SEC champion could and should and would be by the time the season was over. And Tennessee paid the price for that. The yardage differential was 453 for Georgia to 313. Um, so yet another fairly good beatdown. Um, they jumped out to a 10-0 lead, and then we outscored them the rest of the way 31-7. So it did not. The final score looked like the game was closer, but it was one of those where you say, the score made it look closer. Well, that's because we made some mistakes in the beginning. We spotted them the 10-point lead. Then we just raced past them with 31. I think at one point 31 unanswered. They might have gotten a late field goal to make it, or a late touchdown to make it 31-17. Suffice it to say, it was a beatdown. The score was closer than it might have looked, but we really controlled the game after that first quarter, after spotting them at 10-0 lead. And it just brings us full circle to the discussion of the fact that since Heupel took over, when Heupel took over, so we're in the middle now, I guess where I was building towards is to say we're in the middle now of, and I'm very proud and excited to say this, an 8-game win streak against Tennessee. And as I am, as you know, and have heard me talking on these podcasts already, I look at the history of these things, not just the current. And the history of Georgia program, how we're perceived throughout history, is important to me. And one of the things we're always doing is we're not just building a championship team for this year. We're not just adding to this year's legacy. And yes, this year will be great. We'll enjoy the season and you live in the moment, but you're also adding, when you're a team like Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Tennessee, some of the great teams of all time. You're adding to your history, and we are adding to our history. And one of our histories is how we do against our rivals. And one of the things I'm really proud of is to look up and down that there are very, very few teams that have any kind of an all-time winning record against Georgia. Alabama's one of those teams, and I don't think we're likely to ever catch them. They have a lead that's something like 40 something wins to 20 something. So they have something in the neighborhood of a 15, 18, 20 game lead in the all time series. We'll talk about that as we get closer to the Alabama game. We'll talk about each of our big rivals, our longtime rivals, as we get there. Tennessee was not a longtime rival. We had not played them a ton. And even now, we have played them. We now lead the series, 29 wins to 23 losses and 2 ties. So that's only 54 total games in the 120 plus year history of both schools' football programs. And we've played Auburn well over 110 times, something like that. Georgia Tech, obviously, since the dawn of time. So Tennessee, despite being a founding member of the SEC, Georgia being a founding member of the SEC, neither team had really played each other a lot. But when the conference expanded the first time and we moved to East and West divisions, Tennessee logically was placed in the East with Georgia. And suddenly we were playing every year and we were rivals. And that started in my freshman year of college at Georgia. And sadly and rudely, what I was introduced to was I thought Tennessee, I knew the history and the excitement of how we beat Tennessee. Herschel, again, spurred the 16-15 comeback that was the game one or game two in the march to the national championship season, that glorious season. I grew up hearing about that, living in Metro Atlanta, knew all about it, even though I was a little young for that. But and Georgia, sporadically as we played, had a 4-game winning streak going against Tennessee when we went to Knoxville to play them my freshman year. Well, we lost that game, and then we lost the next 8 games. We lost 9 in a row. And 9 in a row is the most losses Georgia has ever incurred against any opponent. So, being the history buff that I am and wanting to correct that, we have not been able to beat Tennessee enough to satisfy me, although we actually have. But I mean, there's just not enough harm we can inflict on Tennessee. That 9-game losing streak just sticks out in infamy for me. And I just want to, I mean, that's worse. The overall 20-year record of like going 3-21 against Florida is actually worse in the big picture, but that was never done in a 9-game chunk. There was a couple 7-game chunks in there and a win here or there. The 9-game losing streak just creates a certain level of embarrassment for me that I feel like has to be corrected. The good news is we have largely corrected that. We won the first game, breaking the 9 game winning streak back in 2000 when Jim Donnan was a coach. And you might remember people storming the field, and we crushed our own hedges when we won at home, finally beating Tennessee for the first time in a while. That was the first game in a 4 game win streak, and what has turned out to be an 18-6 run against Tennessee since that 9 game losing streak. So we went from being several games down in the all-time series and having Tennessee be a team within the SEC that owns a winning record against us to now we have a 5 game winning record against them, and that's being currently built on the back of this 8 game win streak we're on now. So it always makes me a little nervous, even though there's nothing historically that comes forward from teams from 8 years ago to today. But it just feels like there's a certain sense of how many times can you actually beat a quality rival in a row. And so each year as that grows, I get a little nervous because I don't want the Tennessee game to mess up a great season this year if that's what's in tap. I don't want to get to the end of the season if we lose the Tennessee game and look back and say the Tennessee game cost us the playoff. That would be horrific. And yet, I know, logically speaking, what happened in a game 8 years ago has no bearing on what happened today. But I do greedily want to see us at least win this game, not only just to preserve a excellent season this year, but we would match the 9 game winning streak. Since we have a current 8 game winning streak. And so, if we could match or actually win the next 2 and have a 10 game win streak against Tennessee, I think that might correct history enough for me to finally no longer focus on this. So, just a little piece of history there. So, Heupel came into a 4 game losing streak when he took over, and then he's lost the next 4 games. He hasn't really been able to change Tennessee's fate much at all against us. So, that matchup has really gone to Kirby. And, what I guess I want to say is I want to add some more perspective. I was talking in the last day or two a couple times about Georgia playing its own game. And another aspect of that, and we talked about that in yesterday's podcast, how Georgia playing its own game and focusing on how it wants to play, how they want to play, and not what the opponent's doing leads to maybe not having these tremendous blowouts. Tennessee isn't necessarily trying to blow teams out, but the nature of their offense, which I think is a little gimmicky, and I'll explain that here in a few moments, but the nature of their offense tends to allow them to really pound and put up a lot of yards and a lot of points on lesser teams. And again, I think it's a little gimmicky. I'll explain what I mean by that. But this is another example of where Tennessee's numbers tend to be kind of inflated. So I gave some examples about the yardage and how their yardage totals are really big in yesterday's podcast against lesser teams, and they kind of go down against better teams. Here's another example. Since Heupel took over, in while they're 30, while they average winning games 36-16 last year, for instance, in their 10-3 season, making the playoffs, and they had a plus 154 yardage differential, so they outgained teams by 154 yards a game throughout the season. In conference games, not even necessarily against ranked teams, but just SEC conference games, they actually only averaged winning 25-19, and their yardage advantage dropped from 154 yards more gained than the competition to just 69. So you really see when the competition is at a higher level that Tennessee's tremendous stats and big offensive play actually tends to normalize. Now, this is not unusual. You'll see this across the SEC. Nobody just beats up SEC except for maybe Nick Saban, Alabama, and the run that Georgia was on for a while. You'll rarely see any team, even the really heavyweights, LSU and Georgia and Tennessee, you'll rarely see those teams just dominate the SEC for years and years in a row. And even if they win the games, again, you won't see them be putting up. They're not going to typically win SEC games like 40-3, where they might win non-conference games that way. The SEC games will be a lot tighter, and the stats will be a lot closer. But just wanted to sort of point that out. It's just another aspect in which Tennessee's game tends to be different, and it looks a little different on paper, and it causes people to view them a little differently, and that's what we're seeing right now. Tennessee's getting a lot of good. I got off topic, but we were talking about Fran Brown, Syracuse. So Syracuse is a legit team in that they're a significant conference or a significant school with a decent history and a good program. They won 10 games last year, but I think they're in a rebuilding mode this year because they had a lot of um, 1 year guys that left last year. So I don't know how good they're going to be, but they're 1-1 now after, and they got waxed by Tennessee. Although they put up 26 points in that game, so I mean they were not just a complete pushout. And at one point, after getting down big early, they closed the gap, and then Tennessee pulled away. And then of course you've probably seen the scores that playing against East Tennessee State University, wherever and whatever that is, Tennessee blew them out 72-17. So that's impressive. I mean, even as much as we beat down TCU, Florida State, and it just seems like we were scoring at will in every interval you could think of, we still only got into the 60s. And rarely do we even get into the 50s. We have a lot of games we play in the 40s. So it's, got to be something to sit there and watch your team crank up 70 something points. But, and that's got a lot of hype. So people are looking at Tennessee and saying, whoa, Tennessee's a lot better than we thought they were. I'm not sure that they are. I think my perspective is Tennessee is the same team that they always are, which is that they put up big numbers against overmatched teams. And when they play an SEC schedule, when they play a ranked schedule, their numbers tend to come back into line with everything else. And I'll give you some examples. Since Heupel took over, when I looked at what I would call SEC favorites, and this kind of changed a little bit in each of the years. I mean, Kentucky actually even gets into this discussion when I say an SEC favorite, meaning that they were a ranked SEC team in that year when Tennessee played them. And so they were one of the favorites to compete in the SEC. So Tennessee had 5 games in 2021 against ranked SEC teams, and they went 1-4 in those games. In 2022, they went 4-1 in those games, so that was pretty impressive. Again, that was their 11-2 season. 2023, though, they went 0-3 in those games, and they typically were outscored in those games an average of 12-36. So they didn't do very well in those games. Uh, and in 2024, they went 2-1 in those games, and you know what the one was. They lost again to Georgia for the 8th time in a row. And again, the scores were quite a bit tighter. The average score of those 3 games against ranked SEC teams last year was 22-21. Overall, in the 4 years since Heupel took over, and when you're playing ranked or favored SEC teams, they are 7-9. So Josh Heupel has been 7-11 against ranked teams that finish the year ranked. So they are really good against the non-ranked teams and non-winning teams, not as much when the competition gets harder. Now, that sounds like I'm really ripping on them, but the truth is I give Hype a lot of credit. Tennessee was wandering in the woods for a long time, just kind of like Nebraska has been wandering in the woods for a long time. And they were both schools that I had to wonder as a fan, would they ever make it back to an elite status? Because Tennessee, much better place to recruit for than Nebraska, but there was some challenges. Tennessee doesn't have the natural talent base in their state that Georgia, Florida, Texas, Alabama even have access to, so they have to go out of state. And when they were really cranking it up in the 80s and 90s, they were able to recruit nationally and bring players in. But when they fell off, it wasn't clear that they would get the ability to bring people in from out of state because they can't draw enough talent from just in state to compete at the highest level of the SEC. But as we've already talked about, Heupel has improved their talent base. He's improved their rankings. And what I will say that even though I'm sort of knocking his record against ranked teams here, what I will point out is, look, they're winning the games against non-winning teams. They don't stumble their toe and fall over and smash their face into the ground and look stupid against the weak teams, a la what Billy Napier did at Florida this week. Florida's finally getting some momentum. They have a decent first game against an overmatched opponent. They've got a quarterback that people think could help lead them to something. They're in the top 25, and people say, hey, maybe Florida's going to do something. What do? They go out and lose at home in an embarrassing fashion to South Florida. Now, look, South Florida may turn out to be a pretty good team. They may finish the season ranked. They may be one of the better teams in college football. But Still, Florida playing at home should have won, but what was really embarrassing, again, was the lack of discipline. If you heard anything about it, a spitting penalty. Um, it prolonged the drive that allowed South Florida to get to game-winning field goal and win the game at the end when Florida was clinging to a one-point lead. So it's just like the shoe throwing incident all over again. Like Florida comes up with a mystically, unbelievably stupid way in recent times to find a way to lose and embarrass themselves. And Heupel has corrected Tennessee's problems with not winning the games that they should win, and they went through some dark times where they didn't win the teams they against the games they should have. So they're winning the games they should have, but they're not necessarily winning consistently against the big boys, which is not to say they don't win at all. You might remember they've won two in a row at home against Alabama, and um, it's worth noting. Look, last year they or where was I was going to say? Okay, so yeah, look, last year they beat Alabama and they beat Florida in overtime, although Florida didn't turn out to be very good. But just looking back over the last couple of years, they lost to Alabama the year before, but they did beat Texas A&M. And um, looking back the year before, the year they went 11-2, though, they beat a ranked Florida team. They beat a ranked LSU team 40-13. They beat Alabama. That was the year they first beat Alabama and threw the goalposts in the river and everything. But that was the 52-49 win. They beat a ranked Kentucky team who was ranked 19th, 44-6, just destroyed them. They beat a decent Missouri team, 66-24. That was the year they had the embarrassing loss out of nowhere to South Carolina, 63-38, which who knew where that came from? And of course, they lost to us 27-13. But so again, I'm not saying they can't beat. They got a couple wins in there against Alabama. They've beaten LSU. They've beaten Texas A&M. They've beaten Florida. They've beaten some decent South Carolina teams. So I'm not saying they can't compete in the SEC, but by and large, their record when we meter it out over the whole time is basically about 500, a little under 500 in those games. By comparison, let's just go back and remember I was talking about Heupel since he took over at Tennessee is 37-15. Well, I know this is more years because we're talking about 9 full seasons already and now into the 10th season, but Kirby Smart is 37-16 just against top 25 teams. So basically, Kirby Smart has the same record in his tenure in games against the top 25 that Heupel has at Tennessee overall in 4 seasons. So a much, much different story. And I mentioned before Heupel's offense being a little gimmicky. And so I think as we look ahead and we talk about breaking it down, this is a good point to get to this and say, look, here's what I think it is. If you've watched Tennessee, and look, I am by no means a guru, and I'm going to try to avoid getting deep into breakdowns of technical play of football. There are guys who do that and are much more knowledgeable about football technically than me. I didn't play, I was not a player. For instance, I would recommend for people who want to get some perspective on um, what Gunnar Stockton is doing well and what he's not. I watched a video which was an excellent breakdown that Aaron Murray did of the plays from this last weekend, and he showed what he thought could have been better and what he thought was good. He has a YouTube show which is Murray and Mac, I think is what it's called. But if you look for Aaron Murray, I'm sure you could find that. And I recommend that if you really want to get into the deep detail of what's he doing at quarterback and what are the reads and what's going on in that. And I'll talk about it some later in the game and share a little bit, summarize what I learned from Aaron Murray because I learned a lot from that. So I'm not going to try and dig into that level of detail. Aaron Murray was playing football since he could walk and breathe, basically. And he was a scholarship top quarterback, SEC record setting quarterback, Georgia record setting quarterback at Georgia, had a chance to play a little bit in the pros. He knows a ton more about being a quarterback and what should and shouldn't be than I could ever begin to tell you. So when he breaks down Gunnar Stockton, I think we can assume that he knows exactly what he's talking about. But what I'm going to say about the Tennessee offense, and maybe you've heard people say this before, and why I call it a little gimmicky, what they do is they spread people out. They use incredibly wide gaps, as they say. So the wide receivers, they'll go 4 wide, and when you see the 2 outside receivers, they'll almost be like their outside foot will almost be touching the sideline. And the inside receivers will be just a yard or two or three or five inside of them. So the gap between the five offensive linemen with their hand on the ground getting ready to snap the ball and the quarterback behind him in the shotgun or under center, whichever, and the running back behind him, the gap between them is the whole width of the field. And now you don't see, and you say, well, why is that significant? Well, you don't see a lot of teams do that a lot of times because a lot of times teams want to bring the wide receivers, bring tight ends, bring everybody back together. In that way, for instance, if you need to add to your blocking, the running back can start off in the shotgun next to the quarterback and then move out to the side of the offensive line just before or just after the ball snap. Wide receivers can motion, or tight ends can motion from further outside to inside close to the line to provide additional blocking. And so, and it just, when you do what they're doing, there's good and bad. Now, when they go that wide, what they're trying to do is they're trying to take advantage of the core of their strategy is essentially getting very fast, very talented, very capable wide receivers and putting them way out there where the defense is going to have to make a choice, where you're going to have to either leave your cornerback out on an island defending them all by themselves. If you cheat the safeties over, there's four wide receivers spread out at the widest areas. You typically only have two safeties, and then you have your cornerback. So you're going to have to pick and choose. Does the safety stay in the middle of the field and watch out for the running back coming out of the backfield, or the quarterback taking off for the run? Or did the linebackers able to hold that by themselves? But linebackers then would be forced to cover a tremendous amount of space, and a lot of linebackers don't have that kind of speed and side to side ability to go the width of the field in between where all the people are out to the wide sides now and the core of the center and the offensive lineman, the quarterback, everybody in the middle. So it makes the defense make a bunch of choices. It makes the defense potentially leave their cornerbacks out there against wide receivers who are bigger, faster, stronger, and know where they're going. And it puts a premium. One of the things you always have seen, and Heupel has had these people pretty much ever since he's been there, are quarterbacks with big arms because it takes a big arm. I mean, it's a long way to throw the ball. Sometimes the ball maybe only goes 5 or 6, 8 yards downfield, but it goes 40 yards across field, depending on which hash they're throwing the ball from when the play is snapped. So Heupel needs a big arm quarterback, and he's looking for wide receivers that are going to out physical in speed and height and strength the defensive backs that they're playing against. And that's generally the idea: is you're just creating favorable matchups. That's what his it's I say it's a little gimmicky, but it's smart in a way, in that you're just saying, look, we're going to have these favorable matchups. But I think this is also why they don't consistently do well against the better teams, and especially against a team like Georgia. Georgia is built on having one of the best defenses in the country. So in Georgia, what Tennessee runs into when they play Georgia is a team that has defensive backs and safeties that are the equal or maybe better physically than Tennessee's wide receivers. So all of a sudden, these guys, when they're playing, um, Kentucky, they Kentucky has good players. They maybe have one or two defensive backs who are NFL grade guys, but Georgia has a slew of guys who are going to make it in the NFL as safeties and defensive backs. Malachi Starks was one of the highest ranked safeties in the NFL draft in a long time last year. So you have really talented guys back there who are able to match up with these wide receivers. And so now all of a sudden, the play is not easy. When you have a huge physical advantage over the guy you're up against, when you're the Tennessee wide receiver and you're 40 yards out there by yourself and there's no help from the defense, when you get a strong arm quarterback who gets that guy the ball, all he has to do is break the tackle or get past that first guy, and he's just running down the sideline for a 50-yard touchdown or a long chunk play a lot of times. So, well, against Georgia, what has tended to happen is they throw that ball out there. It's 40 yards across the field, 5 yards downfield, and they get tackled immediately. And so that stymies their offense. It's not what they're used to. The play, it doesn't, so they end up in a lot of third downs. And they are able to just chunk their way down the field against teams that don't have that kind of physical talent in the defensive backfield. But then when they run into a team like Georgia, all of a sudden now it's a lot harder, and it's a different ball game, and it's a much closer ball game. And in their case, they have not been able to consistently make those plays. So when you look at those yardage totals I told you, they rack up 450, 500 yards a game throughout the season against all comers. But against Georgia, they've averaged a little less than, or right about 300 yards a game on average. And they've averaged the most they've scored since Heupel took over. They've scored 17 twice, 13 once, and 10 once. So they're averaging just a shade over 14 points a game and just a shade over 300 yards a game when they play Georgia. So their offense has a bit of a gimmick to it. It's not designed to just go right at a defense and attack them in a pro style like Georgia plays or Alabama or some of the other teams. It's designed to out physical teams, but it doesn't necessarily work when they play a team that is their physical match. And the scheme itself is not such a clever scheme as it is just isolating talent. But then when they don't have the talent advantage, now that goes away. So I think that's the matchup that's bad. Not to mention, there's another problem. When you just leave, when you bring all your guys in and you have tight ends and running back, everybody kind of close into the line and the quarterback, again, everybody can kind of branch out and either block, or you see what they talk about tight ends and running backs chipping pass rushers. They come in, which means they just kind of knock them, they hit them off stride. They're not trying to get in front of them, but they actually want to hit them, knock them off balance, and they themselves then flash out into a position where they could catch a ball. So a pass rusher who's coming in strong for the quarterback goes for the blitz, the tight end or the running back chips him, knocks him off stride a little bit, just gives him that little extra step that he's not quite going to get to the quarterback before the quarterback throws the ball. And lo and behold, the quarterback throws the ball to that tight end or running back who chipped him and then ran past him out just 4 or 5 yards downfield, but nobody picked him up, and now he gets a nice gain. So Tennessee is counting on the idea that when they have their 4 and 5 wide receivers way at the far edges of the field, that you're going to send linebackers and safeties and people to the outside. You're going to leave the middle of the defense open. And so if you try to cover up the outside and put your help out there, then they'll hand the ball to the running back, and they have traditionally racked up, close to 200 yards a game on average at rushing the ball since Heupel took over. So they look balanced on paper. But again, a lot of that is not traditional run up the middle, run off tackle, traditional run game. A lot of that is making this sort of read at the start of the play. Did the defense overcommit to go real wide to try and protect against those speedy wide receivers beating them for long plays? And if they did, then they can run the ball right up the middle. They'll have an advantage. They'll have a numbers advantage. The quarterback themselves can take off, and again, they'll have a numbers advantage. And the linebackers are forced to have to try to make these plays with tremendous amount of space. Again, Georgia has some of the best linebackers in all of college football. Commonly, guys like Nakobe Dean, you might remember, and Roquan Smith, people like this are commonly, and now we have C.J. Allen. There are guys out there who, Smal Mondon was there last year. These guys are able to cover the space. They have the speed and the size to close down that space. Against other teams with less talent, Tennessee finds all kinds of space, either wide to the outside or right in the middle, where those linebackers can't keep up. A team like Georgia has the athleticism to get in the backfield. Ought not to mention, Georgia also has powerful front four and front seven when forcing a pass rush. So Tennessee, against lesser teams, they've had good linemen, but against teams with lesser defensive front, Tennessee often finds that they have plenty of time to let the receivers get downfield and throw those long, deep balls way to the sideline to receivers that outmatch the defensive backs and catch the ball and run on to the end zone. But against Georgia, they don't have that kind of time because they only have 5 linemen down. They don't have tight ends close and in. They don't have wide receivers and other people bringing extra blocking to the center. And so a lot of times Georgia's front 7 is able to overmatch and overwhelm. You might remember seeing a lot of sacks from Tennessee quarterbacks last year, each of the last several years, because they're often playing where they actually have a mismatch, where Georgia has more guys coming at them than they have people left inside to block. Now, they usually have a very talented, very stout offensive line. I give Tennessee credit for that. But and the five guys that they have there blocking are enough when they're playing most of the other teams that in their schedule. But when they get to Georgia, it's not enough. And so now their scheme actually puts them almost at a disadvantage instead of an advantage. So I've gone really long and deep into the technical of that, but again, it's not usually my, I don't know if it's my forte or what I really need to do to bring you all this deep technical insight into Tennessee, but that it's a trend, and I wanted to explain what I see in the trend because I've shared with you the numbers that consistently Tennessee puts up bigger numbers against other teams, but when they play higher level of competition, ranked teams, SEC and conference games, and especially Georgia, their yardage, their points, their totals go down, and they look much more average. Are they good enough to win? Yes. Do I think they're good enough to win the game this year? I think they are. They have talent, okay? Like I said, they have recruited talent. Now, one of the things going back to talking about Heupel has improved their talent base. The downside for them is they're still falling behind Georgia when it comes to talent, even though they've upgraded. Going back to the 2023 season, like I said, they were the 10th ranked team in recruiting that year. They had one 5 star and 13 4 star guys. Georgia had two 5 star guys and 20 4 star guys that year. And I just went through and added up over the 4 seasons 2023, 24, 25. Tennessee had 7 5 star guys and 51 4 star guys and hovered around that top 10 position. Georgia, however, as you know, is hovering around the number 1, 2, or 3 position, and during that same time had 14 5 star guys, so twice as many 5 star guys, and 81 4 star guys to Tennessee's 51. So even as Tennessee has improved their talent base, and they are a much better solid program than they were before Heupel got there, they're still, each of the last 4 years, they're losing ground in the talent gap. Georgia is adding more talent at a higher level. Now, again, stars and everything don't mean everything, right? Everybody doesn't pan out and become a world class great player. Some of these guys transfer. Some of these guys never become the players that the coaches, and everybody's hoping they're going to be. But if you have more bullets to shoot, then you're going to hit more targets. Okay, so if you get twice as many 5 stars and 40% more 4 stars, then chances are the number of those guys that do pan out are going to be greater in your favor than they're going to be on, in terms of what Tennessee has. So the last thing I want to talk about is what we've seen so far this season. And again, Georgia has not impressed people with what they've done. I've already tried to offer some perspective about how we play our game, and Tennessee plays their game and their game. And the details I was just describing about the offense, the nature of their offense, and what the structure of it is, lend itself towards getting big plays when they run their offense against teams with lesser talent, and then not such big plays when they run their offense against teams like Georgia or even some of the other better teams in the SEC. But one of the things I thought would add some interesting perspective too is, where you'll see this game look a lot different. And I don't think that what they did against, East Tennessee State University compared to what we did against Austin P is much of a harbinger of anything. This is another thing that'll show you how we play our game and they play their game. It's different. They're the amount of time they're holding the ball. They basically, in the 2 games so far this year, they've got a basically even split, them and their opponents, between time of possession. Whereas Georgia has been doing what it's been doing for most of the last 4, 5, 8 years plus, which is winning the time of possession battle. And this goes to game control, keeping control of the game, and like I've alluded to before, what Kirby Smart calls complementary football. And so that complementary football is keeping the ball so that you're not putting your defense, so that you manage the game. You take a certain amount of time, you move down the field, you score, you put points on the board, you lessen the amount of time the other team can have the ball, you shorten the game. Once you get the lead, you're making it harder and tenser for them to try to catch back up because there's less time, and you're just, it's like the rich get richer. Your defense is resting while their defense is fighting and struggling. And so then when you put your defense back out there after they've had rest, it's a good opportunity. You play less plays. Tennessee has played 140, I think it's 148. No, it's 143. I'm sorry. Tennessee's played 143 plays on defense so far this season in the two games, where Georgia's played 103. They have already played 40 more plays on defense in two games. We played 103, so we're averaging just a shade over 50 plays a game for our defense compared to about 76 plays for our offense. Part of that game control, and I talked about that before when I went through the stats. Tennessee is putting their defense on the field because they score so quickly on the way their offense works against these teams that they're putting their defense back out there. They've already almost played an entire game more snaps on defense than our team in just two games. So this also has, now this may be an advantage for Tennessee that they're playing earlier in the season this year against Georgia, because one thing that's probably hurt them when they play in November is all of these extra snaps accumulate. They've played like an extra game or two worth of plays by the time they get to a Georgia game in November or late October. But here they're going to get to face Georgia early in the season. They're going to be a lot fresher, but they have already accumulated. They have already accumulated 40 more snaps. And again, we're averaging 50 snaps on defense a game. So they've almost played an entire game more. I just went through this and I thought this was really fascinating. They scored on 12 or 6 of 12 drives against Syracuse and an astounding 12 of 15 drives against East Tennessee State. So they've scored on 18 of 27 drives, or 67% so far. But in that time, the total amount of time they've spent scoring on those 18 scoring drives was 42 minutes and 39 seconds. Georgia has scored 7 of 13 drives against Marshall, and then a much lesser impressive 4 of 11 drives against Austin Peay, or 11 of 25 drives so far, 44%, which is not super impressive. But Georgia has held on to the ball 41 minutes and 10 seconds during those 11 scoring drives. So Tennessee has scored 18 times, 18 scoring drives to our 11, and they've held the ball just a shade over a minute, minute and a half more than we have during the scoring of those drives. We have averaged 4 minutes and 14 seconds per scoring drive, and we've averaged running 8.5 plays per scoring drive. Tennessee has averaged 7.5 plays, which I was surprised it was that many, but they've averaged only taking 2 minutes and 35 seconds per scoring drive. And they've actually had 8 scoring drives that were under 2 minutes. They've only had 3 or 4 scoring drives that were 3 minutes or above, whereas we have had 8 scoring drives that were 3 minutes or above. So what does all that mean, or what's my point? My point is we play our game. This goes back to what I was talking about yesterday, and we focus what Kirby. This is a deep dive into what Kirby's talking about when he talks about complementary football. We are making life easier for our defense to be more dominant because they're playing less snaps. They're on the field so far this season, while we haven't really lit up the scoreboard and dominated the teams in front of us like you might have thought we could. We're playing our game, and our game still has been that we're winning time of possession, 33, 34 minutes to 26. Our team has played 8 less minutes of defense so far than Tennessee's, and 40 less plays, almost a game's worth of plays so far already this season. And while Tennessee is flying down the field against these lesser teams and just scoring at will in the matchups advantages that we've talked about, they're doing it so fast that they put their defense back out there, and they did give up 17 points to East Tennessee State and 26 points to Syracuse. So they're averaging giving up 300 yards a game and about 21 points right now. Yes, they're averaging scoring 58 points, and so they're still outperforming their opponents. They have outgained their opponents by 300 yards a game. They're outscoring them by 50, 50 points a game, or no, I'm sorry, about 30 points a game, which is fantastic. But it's or 36 points a game. I'm sorry, I wasn't doing the math very well there. But my point is that these are the things that I think come back to haunt them when they play a team like Georgia. So when you're looking at all that offense and all that points and all those yardage, that you see, and you'll hear people talk about Tennessee leading the SEC, the top five in the nation, this, that, and the other. You need to have the perspective of saying their system puts them in matchups where they are at every play attacking, lesser players. And you say, well, why shouldn't we do that every play? Well, you could, but that system doesn't necessarily work when you don't just have the physical advantage against the other players. And when you play a team that can match up against you and out scheme that system, and you stick to that system like Tennessee has, they haven't been able to solve how to run the system that they're running and have it work against Georgia. And that's why I'm saying it's a gimmick. It's designed to beat 80% of the teams out there, but the 20% of the teams are the ones that are keeping them from being a championship team. They're not going to win the SEC. Yes, they beat Alabama. Yes, they beat some other teams in the SEC, but they keep coming up with two conference losses when they play through their SEC schedule at a minimum, and that keeps them out of the championship hunt, which, with the new expanded playoff, does give them a chance to be in the playoff, but it doesn't really make them an SEC champion, and it doesn't make them necessarily an elite top seed going into the playoff. Coming in last year, everybody thought they might have had a chance to advance. They were playing well. Again, Ohio State did the same thing to them that we did to them. Ohio State was able to put up 400 yards of offense because they had Tennessee on the field all the time defensively. Tennessee was not able to sustain the drives that they normally get and get the big yardage against Ohio State. So against Ohio State, they were they had only 256 yards of total offense and gave up 473. And Ohio State won the game 42-17. Looks a lot like what happens when they play Georgia, right? So, um, again, not trying to knock Heupel. In the big picture, he's done a great job of taking Tennessee and making them a respectable program again, making them a threat. I think they are a threat. I think they are a team that has to be considered one of the teams that's got a shot to make the playoff. And they have enough talent that if they get in the playoff and they get the right breaks, they could make a run. Do I think they're likely to make a run through 4 games to get to the championship through teams like Ohio State and Georgia and Texas? And no, I don't think so. I think they could win one or two of those, and then they're probably going to run out of steam because they just can't sustain a consistent offensive defense, complementary football that would allow them to go toe to toe for 60 minutes with teams that are built like Georgia and Ohio State. So now, does that mean that I'm saying we're going to win this game and it's all in the bag and we're good to go and we don't have to worry about Tennessee? Well, we're going to stop it here today, and we've got several more days to dig into where we think the game's going to go and what's actually going to happen this year, dig a little deeper in the matchups. But this is the big picture perspective on where is Tennessee right now. What is this Tennessee program like? What's Josh Heupel done? And why have we seen the results we've seen the last couple of years? So I think we'll go tomorrow, and the next day we'll dig a little bit more into what I think might actually happen, where we are right now with the players, what is the circumstance, and what can we see? What do we think might be different this year for both teams compared to the last couple of years? So we'll start to break that down. But so no, I'm not yet predicting it's all in the bag and it's just going to be like every other year. I'm just giving you the big picture to say this is where it's been these last couple of years, and this explains kind of what we've been seeing and why. So now we'll see, do we think that is going to continue? When we talk about come back tomorrow, is that going to continue? Can we expect the same trend to be there? Obviously, the talent gap I've described is still there, but we got to look at some of the individual matchups and players and see where that leads us. So this has been a longer podcast than I wanted it to be, but there's a lot of detail to get into, and I think that gives you a really strong history perspective on Tennessee, my desire to make sure that we win this game and the next one and get to that 10-game winning streak and erase the memory of the 9-game losing streak that they beset against us years ago. And as always, I'm going to call it here for today and just leave you with the two simple words, go Dogs.